Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. With me online from Istanbul Airport is Dimitri Lascaris. Reason to Resist is the podcast where you can find Dimitri hosting some fantastic material. Do check that out. Also, no less of a resistance voice is Raza John Vedadi, writer, author, and also blogger. You can find him on Substack and various other social media outlets as well. And of course, we're going to talk today about the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei, a huge event. It seems some reports say over 43 million people attended the various events, which stretched from Tehran through to Qom, onto Iraq. The holy cities of Najaf and Karbala were taken in, and finally in Mashhad, where he found his final resting place. Scenes of emotional connection, probably not witnessed since the time when Ayatollah Khamenei, the founder of the Islamic Revolution, if you like, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, we've not seen anything like it, to be honest. Dimitri was there. Raza John Vedadi was there as well. Dimitri, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for taking the trouble to talk to us even while you're in transit down there in Istanbul. But first of all, you went there and you witnessed much or some of this kind of funeral procession and the reactions. I'd love to know your sort of eyewitness ground account on what you saw.
Well, just by way of background, this is my third trip to Iran in the past 14 months. I was there for the first time in my life in May of last year, a few weeks before the 12-day war. And then I was there during the Ramadan war in the second half of March and visited 7 cities as the country was being bombed. And I was invited back by the state broadcaster to cover the funeral. And this I readily accepted. I thought it was an extraordinary journalistic opportunity. I also have developed a deep affection for Iran, so I immediately accepted the invitation. It was a 7-day funeral program. The first day, the Friday, last Friday, was reserved for dignitaries and world leaders to pay their respects to the martyred supreme leader whose body was lying in state. And then there were 3 days of prayers and funereal processions in Tehran, the capital. And then the program shifted to the holy city of Qom. On the second to last day, the body of the supreme leader, the coffin, was transported to Iraq. And there were massive gatherings in Najaf and Karbala. And then finally, his body was laid to rest on the 7th day in Mashhad, which is the site of the Imam Reza shrine. That is the only one of the imams of the Shia faith who is buried in Iran. And it's an extraordinary complex. First time in my life I'd ever seen it. So I arrived in Iran the day before the 7-day program began. I was only able to follow the first day, the dignitaries and world leaders paying their respects by video feed, because it was a very exclusive event. Very few journalists were allowed into it. But then I was there for the 3 days in Tehran. I was at the Mosalla Mosque on the first and second day, and was in the streets of Tehran, central Tehran, on the third day, and then went to Mashhad and spent 2 or 3 days there and was there for the final day. What I saw briefly was vast throngs of people, the likes of which I've never seen in my entire life. I've participated in many protests, small and large. This vastly surpassed anything that I'd ever participated in or seen with my own eyes. While I was there, actually in the streets, I am confident that there were millions of people present. And the number that the Iranian government is offering, 40 to 43 million, which is based, it says, on a variety of techniques for estimating the size of the crowds who participated. To me, it seems like a credible number. Certainly tens of millions of people, I think, in total participated at one point or another. And that in and of itself, I think, poses a major problem for the Western narrative about Iran. But what struck me, quite apart from the size, was the predominant emotions of the people in the streets. Of course, there was grieving and there was mourning, but there was a tremendous amount of indignation, open calls for the assassination of Donald Trump, One banner that I saw declared that there had been $100 million bounty established for the head of the Donald. And perhaps most notably, a lot of the indignation was directed at those within the government who are pursuing the strategy of negotiating with the treacherous and perfidious Trump regime. And in fact, I was not there when this happened, but I am told that the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, and also the president, Mr. Pezeshkian, when they went into the streets and attempted to address the crowds, they were met with some hostility and had to leave the scene because people were irate that rather than avenging the blood of their beloved supreme leader and defending and pursuing a strategy of penalizing the United States for its aggression, they had opted for an approach of negotiation. So I think that is something that is going to perhaps change the complexion of the thinking within the Iranian leadership about how to deal with the Trump regime going forward.
Well, Raza, that's a fascinating first-hand account. You were there as well. Please feel free to tell us what your impressions were of the funeral itself, but even more importantly, what the implications of such an outpouring are, because they've essentially turned the martyrdom of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei into a refueling, it seems, of the entire revolutionary spirit of Iran, potentially. That was something that Donald Trump certainly wasn't thinking about when he thought it was a clever idea to essentially assassinate the leader of this nation.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There's this discussion that after the martyrdom of Shahid Ayatollah Khamenei and the rallying around the Islamic Republic, and then the encouragement of the people to support the revolution once again in numbers where some people discussed they didn't see this kind of support during the war with Iraq in the 1980s. The way they saw the Iranians come out and demonstrate in their hundreds of thousands during every single night where there was war. So this you could kind of, if you want to put it poetically, the blood of Shahid Ayatollah Khamenei has given birth or has nurtured the tree of revolution in Iran once again. And this is in part due to the United States miscalculating how the Iranians would react to the situation, or miscalculating how the Iranian society may have fallen apart if they, assassinated the leader and other top officials. But what it had done is demonstrate that Ayatollah Khamenei for 37 years helped build a society where it's institutionalized, where the people are not relying on one person. They rally around the flag, but they're also managing each department, each organization, each part, ministry or whatever of society themselves, not relying on one individual right at the top like a dictatorial king. So many things have been demonstrated by the martyrdom of Shahid Ayatollah Khamenei, and one of it has been the kind of the boost for the revolution, the boost for the ideology, the reasons for the revolution, justice against oppression, so forth and so on. And the other is that Iranians are more happy or more open to declare their love for their leader and for the revolution and for Islamic Republic than maybe there would have been, the same people would have been shy to do that a year or so ago.
Well, Dimitri, Donald Trump must have had a bit of a fright. I mean, he went into this war under the impression that nobody liked Sayyid Ali Khamenei. The establishment was under pressure, and that Iran would its own people would overthrow the government if they went and bombed. This is what he was sold, apparently. Where do you think he sits now in terms of having seen this funeral and the reaction of the Islamic Republic? And of course, we note that he's continued to bomb. In fact, I believe you said that he bombed even the route from Tehran to Mashhad to try to disrupt people's attendance of the final phase of the funeral. Where do you think Trump and the US sit now?
Just before I respond to your question, I'd like to clarify one thing. Reza indicated I was at the dignitaries. I was not given access to the dignitaries paying their last respects. In fact, I was in the streets for 6-7 hours a day in the blazing heat, walking amongst the people there. And as I mentioned, I interviewed them. So Apart from that, I entirely concur with what Reza said. Now, with respect to Trump's response to what I think is the demolition of the Western narrative about Iran, part of that narrative, a key part of course, is that there is only a tiny fringe at most of the population that supports the Islamic Republic and the current government. And if they're given half an opportunity to overthrow it, they will jump at the opportunity. I think that we can now say with a high degree of confidence, those of us living in the West who've been paying any attention at all to what happened in Iran during the past week, that this is bollocks, complete and utter bollocks. I can't say with confidence that a majority of the population supports the Islamic Republic, but certainly tens of millions of people do. That is quite clear. And if Donald Trump were a rational actor, and that is the operative question, then his response to what we witnessed during the past week would be to abandon all attempts to overthrow this government by means of various forms of coercion and subversion. But as you mentioned, he's not only ordered his military to continue the bombardment, but he appears to be escalating. Where this all will lead, I think, is in a global economic catastrophe. But the likely outcome is that the Islamic Republic will remain firmly in power with the support of a large segment of the population. And so those of us living in the West, and this was my primary reason for going there, Mohsin, was I wanted to show, I anticipated that something like this was going to happen. I wasn't sure that we would see a huge outpouring of support for the martyred supreme leader and a level of support for the Islamic Republic that belies the Western narrative. And I wanted to share that information with people in the West to awaken them to the reality of this country. They may not like it. They may wish that Iran was something other than it is, but that is Iran. And if you want to have an intelligent and effective foreign policy, you have to base it on reality, not on fantasy. Unfortunately, Donald Trump appears to be clinging to fantasy. I see no indication thus far that he is prepared to accept the reality of what Iran is.
So, Raza, we've got palpable expressions and desire for revenge on the streets of Iran. I think I picked up from my own sources and other journalists like Patrick and others who are out there, who all seem to be indicating that there's a real desire for an end even to the memorandum of understanding. They can't understand why there's even a negotiation going on. At the same time, Donald Trump has decided to bomb the south of Iran, and Iran has retaliated with attacks on Bahrain, Kuwait, and even Qatar. And so this tit for tat seems to be ongoing. That's been at least 3 major exchanges of fire, and it's still continuing. Do you see any hope for the memorandum of understanding?
Plus, add the United States not abiding by the giving back of Iranian assets, United States reimposing sanctions on Iranian sale of Iranian oil. So many of us foresaw that this will take effect. It was only a opportunity for Trump to try and reduce the conflict to a very more manageable situation for himself and for the Israelis. And so why this memorandum of understanding was never going to lead to an actual ceasefire. Many of us foresaw this. And so I think that the United States, this tit for tat, will only continue up to the extent where Iran will allow it to continue. It then becomes Iran's, the ball will fall into Iran, how it will deal with it, to what extent it will allow, because this will prevent Iranian economy and Iranian society from stabilizing and growing. And that's something that the new leader really wants to achieve, is stabilization, security, not just for Iran, obviously for other countries such as Lebanon as well. So allowing this tit for tat, it can't continue like this. And we have to bear in mind that the United States won't give up, because the United States, and I'm the kind of person who doesn't think that the United States is controlled by the Zionist lobby. I do believe that the United States itself exerts power on the Israelis and the capability of influencing the Zionist lobby itself, because the funding for the Zionist lobby comes from the United States, goes to Israel, and then it's brought back, laundered back into the United States to fund these congressmen and presidents and so forth. So I do believe that the United States at some point has to realize that Iran is the power. It cannot deal with it like it would deal with it like 30, 40, 50 years ago. Cannot deal with it like it dealt with Iraq or even Venezuela. No disrespect to Venezuela. Venezuela is a dignified country, but Iran's capabilities and its geostrategic position with closing the Strait of Hormuz, is being able to influence Iraq, it's being able to influence Yemen, Lebanon, all the way to the Caucasus, and then even up to Afghanistan. All of these influences that Iran has and its connection, its connectivity to India, China, and Russia enables Iran to have a more powerful geo position than, say, Venezuela. And it's obviously military capabilities. And the fact that we saw in the last week, the number of people, not just in Iran, but a number of people in Iraq came out to show respect. You have to bear in mind the millions that came out in Iraq. Ayatollah Khamenei was not the leader of Iraq. He was the leader of Iran. But millions came out in Iraq to show respect to him, because the leadership in Iran isn't just a political system. It's a leadership that crosses boundaries of faith. That's why it's able to have allies in Yemen and in Lebanon and in Iraq and other parts of the world. It's not because of just geopolitical benefits. It doesn't work like the Western system where the United States is using Israel, or the Europeans, British have set up Israel to benefit its own political and economic foreign policy. They work together. These countries of Lebanon and Iraq and Yemen and Iran work together because they have ideology of fighting against injustice and oppression. And all of their countries are being oppressed by the United States and its allies. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration. And unfortunately, Trump won't see any of this. He just wants to have some kind of victory so that he can go back and continue whatever policy that he wants to have, whatever kind of position he wants to maintain in the United States. So they will continue to pressure Iran, and Iran will eventually have to come to a point where it have to exert some kind of response that will prevent it from having this. At the moment, if you want to go to Iran, you can only go with Iranian airlines. You can't fly to Iran with an Omani airline or a Turkish or any other airline. For whatever reason, they're not going, right? It's only Iranians. So it's good for the Iranian airline industry, but then what this does is prevent the idea of people who want to go for tourism, people who want to go for the pilgrimage to the holy shrines, people who want to go there and invest business, because Iran's a vast country, vast amounts of manufacturing and industries and resources. So this whole structure of tit for tat prevents Iranian growth, which Iran will have to deal with. And then we'll discuss maybe in the next questions how Ayatollah Khamenei discussed the idea of avenging Ayatollah Khamenei, his father, but he doesn't necessarily put the emphasis on himself. He puts it onto the world, on the freedom-loving people of the world, which we can discuss in future questions.
That's interesting indeed. Dimitri, the reality is that Iran is capable, it seems, of continuing a war of attrition. The Americans don't want to back out. The Israelis don't want them to back out. So do you think an all-out war is the most likely scenario now, and a complete dumping of the notion of negotiations or any kind of compromise?
Well, I just want to highlight one precedent. It's not just one, there are several precedents, but the most recent, which I think must be of deep concern to the Iranian leadership, and that is the case of Syria. There was a brutal, hot war in that country, fomented and intensified by the West for several years, and it seemed as though the forces of the resistance had prevailed ultimately and had defeated the Takfiris in Syria. But what then happened was that the United States and its proxy, and I completely agree with it, as Israel is a proxy of the United States, and with the full backing of European vassals of Washington, continued a lower intensity war against the Assad government, and eventually it collapsed. And so I strongly suspect that is now the strategy that they are planning to pursue with respect to Iran, because they failed to overthrow the Islamic Republic. They, in fact, had their if you'll excuse my French, asses handed to them in the Persian Gulf. And Iran, there's no military solution that they can see for reestablishing control over the Strait of Hormuz and wresting it from the Islamic Republic. So I think that they have adopted Plan B, which is the Syrian option. And I think that that could succeed. It would be much harder in the case of Iran. It is a much more formidable opponent for a variety of reasons than Syria, but it could in the long run succeed. And so the Iranian leadership, I think, must be very concerned about that and will not allow this war of attrition to endure for years. It will, perpetually weaken the state, degrade the state, potentially destabilize the state ultimately. But they have a trump card that Syria didn't have, and that is the Strait of Hormuz. And to my mind, the most intelligent option available to them now is to effectively impose a severe penalty on the global economy, particularly the U.S. economy, to bring to an end this war of attrition and to impose real deterrence upon the United States. Iran has not yet done that. It was close to doing that, but then it signed the Memorandum of Understanding and allowed some level of relief in global oil markets and commodity markets. I think now, if it really wants to bring this to closure, it is going to have to inflict a severe penalty on the United States economy and establish real deterrence. And that may well be where we're heading now with this announcement that they're closing the Strait of Hormuz.
So, Raza, this notion of shutting down the Hormuz is potentially the first part of the Iranian sanctioning of the global, if you like, economy, because they've been sanctioned. Iran could justifiably say, look, for 40 plus years, you've all sat by and joined the American sanctions on Iran. You talked about the airlines not even going to Iranian airports. That's part of it, I guess, isn't it? So this business of a kind of counter-sanctioning by shutting down the Hormuz could be added to by their Yemeni allies, couldn't they? And then you could have perhaps the el-Mandeb shut down. That would be a real issue because people talk about only, I think, something like 20% of the oil coming from the Hormuz. In reality, it's 40% of the usable oil that has to be taken into account. So it's far worse than they were trying to make out. And actually, the reserves of oil had pretty much depleted, and they are depleting very, very rapidly even now. So if, in addition to the Hormuz being shut down, Iran also talks to its friends in Yemen and decides that the Red Sea is no longer accessible and the Suez Canal is literally going to be shut down, what happens then?
So if you remember during COVID, I remember living in England at the time, and the petrol prices went up from about £1.30 a litre to about almost £2. And this was without any of the straits closed, without any, it was just the chaos that was caused by this idea of the pandemic. So we can see that already they're artificially maintaining the lower rate of the cost of oil and petrol. So even though there's all of these blockages and all of the closed Strait of Hormuz and all of these things, so that eventually the reserve will go down, the reserve will finish, and there will be nothing else to dip into. So then we will see problems in the United States and possibly other Western economies where they're forced to come to some kind of table. For some reason, I have this idea that the United States rather destroy its own economy. It rather put extreme amount of hardship on its own people and the rest of the world than come to the table to accept Iran as a equal partner in any kind of agreement that they have. For some reason, every single agreement they go into, they backstab, they don't apply it, they don't abide by it, and they completely leave it. So I generally find that the United States, and I don't think this is just a Trump issue, I think this is a US elite who run the foreign policy issue, that they don't see, and it could be some of it to do with Orientalist ideas of, the East cannot dictate to us, so forth and so on. So I can't foresee, I can't prophesize what will exactly happen, but I find that the United States will be it'll find itself very difficult to sit down with Iran on equal terms. That's one issue. So maybe there will be some kind of major conflict out of that. As we discussed, ground troops will be very difficult to achieve. Where would they take the ground troops without the Iranians knowing and then bombarding them with missiles? This is not like Iraq 2003, where it didn't have the mechanism to defend itself when the troops were gathering in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and other places. So that's one issue. The other issue is, will all of this lead to some kind of internal problems for Israel? And if Israel falls apart, if Israel is not able to maintain itself as a state that it is, will this then have an impact on how then United States approaches Iran? Because then this will give Iran more leverage over the whole region. Yes, there's Turkey, there's Pakistan, and there's Saudi Arabia, but Iran will become the one who's controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And we see that Iran will not give up the Strait of Hormuz because it's the nuclear option for Iran without having nuclear weapons. It's even more powerful than a nuclear option because you're able to impact the world economy and politics without killing lives, like a nuclear weapon. So we'll have to see how in the next few weeks pan out. I think the 60 days is coming up to an end. The World Cup is coming to an end. We'll have to see, was this all 60 days just so they can have a World Cup dominated by President Trump removing red cards and enabling the Argentinians to play tricky games? There's so many stuff going on in the background that time itself will demonstrate what's happening. So, but there is no doubt the United States has realized that Iran has prepared itself for conflict, has prepared itself for economic warfare, and has prepared itself for a political warfare. And it's interesting that Iran, not necessarily the government itself, but the people itself have taken the kind of control of the narrative with the Lego movies, with the videos that are coming out, with inviting, journalists and activists from around the world to see Iran itself with the good and the bad, the problems that it has, but also the strengths that it has, the culture that it has, so that the people outside of Iran, be they even non-Muslim, are seeing Iran in a new light after 47 years of controlled media narrative by the West, which is starting to fall apart after billions and billions have been spent on Hollywood and legacy media. Just, activists like Dimitri and so many other who have gone to Iran just through their social media are able to impact millions of viewers, impact millions of people who haven't seen Iran without some kind of a filter. The filters have been removed and they can start to see Iran. So this support from around the world also has an impact, not just morally, but it also demonstrates that the United States is losing the narrative, is losing the argument that Iran is a pariah or a rogue state or whatever it was, where now they have a new axis of evil, which is Russia and China. The three axes, Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, we're finished with. Now we're going to the two new axes. So all of these narratives, and Ayatollah Shahid Khamenei, he did discuss that it's important for Iranians and the axis of resistance to also have an impact on narrative. It's not just the military that's important, but the discussions, the ideas that are discussed through narrative and media must be strong so that the outside world sees what the axis of resistance led by Iran has to say about these issues.
Well, Dimitri, Lindsey Graham died, and he was one of the big advocates of war on Iran. He seems to be a big advocate on war everywhere. So I think there must be a lot of celebration going on amongst those very people who are grieving, and I dare say many others around the world. But people like Lindsey Graham still exist very much within the upper echelons of the American society and leadership. But they were the ones who set out the agenda, along with, I guess, the Zionist lobbies, Israeli lobbies, whatever you want to call them. These people basically had the argument that Iran is a backward society, oppresses its women, so we've got to deal with it on a human rights level. Iran will have a nuclear bomb, and it's an irresponsible rogue terrorist state which basically spreads war and terror everywhere, and therefore we must stop Iran having this nuclear weapon. Iran has ballistic missiles which it threatens all of its regional neighbors. We've got to defang its kind of capabilities on that level. This was the kind of general mantra. The Hormuz Strait wasn't even on the radar, so Donald Trump has managed to achieve something even worse in terms of the situation that he was trying to address, as per his Zionist lobbyists or his own American hawks, if you like. So he's kind of dug himself a bit of a hole. He can't come out of this looking like he's won anything if the Hormuz remains shut, if Iran remains with a ballistic missiles capability, if Iran remains with its nuclear material, peaceful or otherwise. And of course, the other thing that I want maybe your reaction on is like the neighbors, who are now obviously going to be more jittery because Iran has taken an asymmetric warfare tactic, which includes bombing their nations, wherever the US bases are within those nations, at will. And they can do that. And that's something which USA's puppet regimes in the region now have to also factor in, because they can it's all very well having a superpower backing you or you being tied into him. But if he can't actually defend your nation militarily, and that's what you're paying him for, then is that equation going to change? And will that possibly put pressure on the US in the long run to change its tactics?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but let me begin by saying that although I am not and have never celebrated the death of a human being, if I had a bottle of champagne with me here in Istanbul's airport, I would be corking it open today because the world is a better place thanks to the departure of that psychopath, Lindsey Graham. However, Lindsey Graham, like Donald Trump, are themselves puppets. They are puppets of an oligarchy, and that oligarchy is hell-bent on global hegemony. And one thing that I think at this particular moment that oligarchy finds very attractive about Iran are its natural resources, because that oligarchy is making humongous investments in artificial intelligence, and that requires enormous amounts of energy to exploit. So the fundamental problem we confront, you can get rid of Lindsey Graham's and Donald Trump's, but the problem will persist, and that is the structure of the U.S. economy and political system. It has been taken hostage by the billionaire class, by a corporatocracy that knows no decency, no scruples, is only concerned with its own enrichment and empowerment. And unfortunately, the American people did not heed that warning from Dwight D. Eisenhower on the final day of his administration when he warned of the rise of the military-industrial complex. It is a cancer that has now metastasized throughout the West, and we are seeing this, in this radical increase in military spending throughout the West that is going to bankrupt what remains of the fiscal health of Western societies. So I nonetheless remain optimistic because I believe that ultimately their greed is going to bring about their downfall. They will ultimately have to confront the wrath of the people. And this may be the catalyst. This may actually be what is happening in the Persian Gulf, may unleash revolutionary forces. And I'm certainly hopeful that it will. And that the outcome of that revolutionary process will be a radical restructuring of the distribution of wealth in Western society. That's fundamentally what we need here. Until that happens, these wars of aggression will continue, and countries like Iran will continue to be targeted, sadly. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, as you've extended the vision, or if you like, or the scope, I might as well ask the question. It's also an escalation against Russia, which is taking place now. The US makes it look like they're in the background and they're not really on the front line. They've got the Ukrainians fighting a war, and then it's NATO which actually pushes it, and then America in some way is trying to make out it's not really the frontline protagonist with Russia. But the effect of their war, essentially, against Russia is also, in a way, very similar to what's going on in Iran, insofar as the global economy is going to take a big hit. The Ukrainians have been hitting Russian tankers, oil tankers as well now. They've been knocking them out. And there is this kind of roots and resources war, we know that. But taking on Russia and Iran simultaneously and risking the trade choke points just seems to be an act of suicide. Do you think China, which stands to lose probably the most if energy shuts down from all these regions in the way it has, do you think eventually it will have to act, and the global South, etc., may have to unite to rein in the Americans somehow, whatever way that may be?
Yes, absolutely. I in fact, have been rather disturbed by the level of restraint that both China and Russia have shown. I think it to me, it's quite remarkable that of the three of these leaders of the resistance, shall we say, China, Russia, and Iran, the only one that has gone so far as to demolish U.S. military bases, directly attack them again and again, is the one that does not possess a nuclear arsenal and has by far the smallest military budget and by far the smallest economy of the three. And it has survived. Why has Russia not, and I consider myself a man of peace. I do not war, but I'm also a realist. And I see just the implacable determination of these warmongers in the halls of power in the West to continue down this path. And I don't think that there is any way that Russia is going to bring an end to this war other than by establishing real deterrence. And right now, it has fostered a sense of impunity amongst European states and the United States. They are effectively waging a war on Russia through a Ukrainian proxy. And why hasn't Russia taken the step that the Iran has taken quite successfully, I should say? And based on my conversations with people inside Russia, they're asking that very question. There is a tremendous amount of frustration right now with the Russian government for the level of restraint it has shown. And China has been even more passive in this regard. Now, they're very sophisticated, they're very strategic. But bluntly, if I were in their shoes, I would take the opportunity to seize Taiwan right now, not by invading it, but by blockading it. I would impose a blockade. This is the moment to do it. Don't allow the United States to recover from the weakness it is now suffering from, the depletion of its munitions, the economic difficulties it is now confronting because of these hyper-aggressive policies. And if the three of these non-Western powers were to coordinate their efforts more carefully and seize this moment of opportunity, I think that they would be doing themselves and humanity at large a favor. Because make no mistake, passivity is not going to work. Inevitably, we will find ourselves in a global conflagration unless and until true deterrence is established vis-a-vis Western powers.
Well, blockading is fashionable for the Americans, it seems. They're blockading Cuba into starvation and death and all sorts of things that are going on there, and they're covering out. They did it to Venezuela. They obviously want to do it even with Russia, given what they're doing in the Crimea and this business of knocking tankers out. They obviously are trying to hit supply lines as well. When it comes to Iran, of course, doing it, then Iran becomes a terrorist. But it does seem as though that double standard is kind of the norm for the Anglo-Zionist empire, I guess. And I shared Dimitri's frustrations at the fact that those who at least have policies domestically and abroad which aren't out to exploit other nations. China isn't necessarily an exploitative power at the moment, nor is Russia, I don't think. And you'd have thought that there would have been, not only on a matter of principle, but also in terms of a matter of security, an even closer strategic alliance. There are defense agreements between Russia and Iran. There are strategic alliances with China, but they don't seem to have extended to the point where they can give an emphatic deterrence. And then there are, of course, powers like Pakistan who could probably up their game. They are obviously trying to negotiate this peace deal, but they're a nuclear power too, and they're a neighbor of Iran's, yet they seem probably, to me, likely to go where the money is. That's where the nature of a lot of those regimes is. What's your take on this axis, or the Eurasian axis, if you like, or the rising multipolar axis? Do you think they need to step up to play it a little more, step up their game?
I assume that's to me. So what I would reply to that is that Iran's policy is more ideological than Russia's and China's. China has 1.5 billion people that it needs to feed on a daily basis, 2-3 times a day. So it has this policy of not antagonizing and shaking the boat, progressing its economy, progressing its technology, its capabilities. And I'm sure at some point they know there may be a conflict with a power like the United States. The Russians are obviously bogged down with Ukraine, and they are, entangled with that. And we have to remember that Iran never asked the assistance of any of these two powers in its defense of its territory during the wars. And it's something that they're very proud of, that they will defend the country themselves. Yes, they'll probably receive some kind of military capabilities, defense capabilities, technologies, but asking them to get involved directly. And I don't think at the moment there's a need for these two powers to get involved with with the region of West Asia to try and defend Iran or the axis of resistance there. But we have to bear in mind that eventually the United States, I'm starting to see that the United States is turning into a rabid animal that has got its leg trapped into a trap, and it will start clawing at everything to try and escape, because the dollar is weakening, because the economy is ballooning, because of the fact that there's so much injustice in the United States itself, where you have 3 or 4 individuals who have the same amount of wealth as 60% of the United States citizens. All of these injustices will eventually cause, there may be strife, there may be civil conflict in the United States, there may be civil war. All of these things have been discussed. There may be, some of the states like Texas or California that may want to go separate and separate themselves from the union and so forth. All of these things are simmering under the situation in America. So we don't know in a year or two what the world will look like. We can try and predict it, we can try and plan for it, but to say that if the United States, if Iran and China and Russia get together, would be a better way to deal with the United States than allowing it to die by 1,000 cuts, because sometimes that will cause less damage and less casualties and deaths than if there's the three major powers coming together and working on it. So America is a weakening country. The superpower they used to be, it's not anymore. We saw that with the military conflict with Iran. It's China is developing its economy rapidly at the moment, and it's becoming independent. It's not relying on U.S. High tech anymore. It's not relying on U.S. chips anymore. It's starting to go independent. So this will make itself more immune to kind of either sanctions or kind of like anything economic that America wants to place on it. And this is a tactic the China is using. I think at the moment it's like 10% of their trade is with the United States. So they probably want to, bring that to, single digits, so that if there is some kind of conflict over Taiwan or something else, that if that trade stops, it won't impact the Chinese economy as much. But militarily, they're capable of looking after themselves. There's no doubt about that. They're very, high-tech aeroplanes, high-tech missiles, high-tech, they have nuclear weapons. So there's no worry about defending themselves in that sense. But what they want to do is try to maintain the economic growth to the point where that if that conflict does arise with the United States, which many predict will eventually will, because the United States has no other choice. The problem with the United States is it doesn't see itself as, these countries are coming up, let me work on myself and improve myself. The way the United States sees everything is like, other countries are improving, how can I damage that country so it doesn't improve? As opposed to, how can I better myself? It's like the schoolyard bully who sees other, children in the school developing and becoming smarter. They get jealous, they project, and so they bully that children instead of saying, okay, let me go and study and learn and develop as well. So this is the problem with the United States, and a lot with the West as well, with the Europeans as well. They don't see the growth of other country as a competition that they need to grow as well. They see the growth of other country as a threat, and so they have to diminish that growth, take the resources of that country and its capabilities, and incorporate it into their own economy. This is the colonial mindset that they have, and they still haven't come outside of that. So we'll have to see. But I think at the moment there's no need for these three countries to get involved, and I think they're all kind of playing it. And we have Araqchi going to these three countries constantly, and other countries in the region, and planning the moves that they have, I suppose, together. So at the moment, there is no need for them to get militarily involved, but China buying Iranian oil when other countries can't. That's a massive support for Iran. We have to bear in mind, before the sanctions were removed so that Iran could sell it to other countries, China was assisting Iran to, go around the sanctions that the United States is imposing on the whole world against Iran. So China is playing its part. Russia is playing its part with supplying some capabilities, and also these countries providing the political cover in the UN Security Council. All of these things are very important because Iran didn't have these 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the Security Council, you had China and Russia voting against Iran in a lot of places. Now that's not happening. So Iran having these allies with these kind of support in these places makes a massive change, and its capabilities of defending itself militarily have been demonstrated with the support of the citizens and society. So I think they're trying to play as smart as they can without destroying the world. So this is the interesting part. You have the Western countries that talk about responsibility being the most irresponsible players in the world scene. And then you have the countries that they have, for in the narrative of the last 50, 60 years, saying are rogue and dangerous and dictatorial and communist and so forth and so on, being the most responsible international players. They're playing the game in a way where the international economy of the world is not completely destroyed. Because Iran could have closed the Strait of Hormuz so nothing would go out for a whole 6 months. That would have devastated the world economy. But it's trying to play in a way where normal countries are not suffering as much.
Sure.
The pressure is more placed on the United States.
That's a very comprehensive conclusion. I'll leave the last word to you, Dimitri. And first of all, I'll just thank you for joining this program from Istanbul Airport, I believe. And they're giving you a hard time over there, but thank you so much for adjusting. It's a tough job, and we appreciate it. But your final thoughts after having been in Iran, seen the mood there, and I guess from the people's point of view, what would the message be to the world around this conflict?
Well, I'll share with you one of the experiences I had in the street in Mashhad on the day that they delivered the coffin of the martyred Supreme Leader to the Imam Reza shrine. I was filming in the streets, and I walked by a lady, an Iranian woman who heard me speaking in English, talking into my camera, and she, when I paused in my speaking, she addressed herself to me in impeccable English, and she said, "First, I want to thank you with all my heart for coming to our country and telling the Western world what is happening here." And then I said to her, "Would you like to say something in the camera?" And she said yes. And she said, as soon as I pointed the camera at her, "To all of you out there in the West, I want you to know that what you see around me here today, this is Iran. This is the real Iran. And I am not AI. I am a flesh and blood human being.
Okay.
And I will stand with my country to the bitter end." That's what she said. And I can't say it more eloquently than she did. That is the mood in the country today, overwhelmingly. Of course, there are people who are opposed to the current government, who are more Western oriented than those that I saw on the streets in massive numbers. But predominantly, that is the mood in Iran today. This is a country that is assuming its rightful place in the world. It is a wonderful civilization, a wonderful people. And I think it is high time that we began in the West to accord the Iranian people the respect that they so richly deserve.
Dimitri, thank you very much. It's been a really fascinating insight into what's happening on the ground there, but then also the analysis. You've both done a splendid job in opening up all sorts of thoughts and reflections and facts, I would say. As far as the folly of Donald Trump in going into Iran and trying to bomb it into submission, or to overturn its government, or to defang its so-called nuclear weapons program, which still is, undiscernible. It factually seems to me incorrect to say that they had a nuclear weapons program. They'd actually signed a JCPOA treaty which monitored things, and it was Donald Trump who reneged on that treaty, and now there's no way of checking what's going on in Iran. Why should Iran let anybody check anyway? Israel doesn't let anybody check its nuclear weapons. Why is this double standard there? That's something you'd have to consider. And the consequences of Donald Trump going in and doing what he did, along with his Zionist allies and all the other hawks out there and the money mafias that are making money out of wars, well, you know, they're in a mess, aren't they? They've not won the war. They've not changed the government. They've not got rid of any of the things that they said they were. In fact, they've created a bigger problem for all of us, which is that our very economies are about to fall around our ears. It's, I think, the obligation of people in the West to definitely wake up and to, as Dimitri has been hinting, is to really make these people accountable. They can't continue to lead us down pathways which are self-destructive and also which help billionaires and trillionaires, and also make sure that we're all fighting, feeling divided, fearing and demoralized. There has to be a pushback to this. I guess that's what our job is on these independent media channels, is to try and awaken people to see the reality. And I thank Dimitri and Raza for opening our eyes just that little bit more. Do like, share, subscribe to Dimitri's channel. Dimitri, your channel is called, remind me.
Reason to Resist.
Reason to Resist.
With the number
The
two
number two.
between Reason and Resist, yes.
Okay, so that's Dimitri's podcast. Do go there. Absolutely prolific. So much great content there. And please do like, share, subscribe. We all rely on your support. Legacy Media, of course, tries to drown us out. Same goes with Raza John Vedadi. Raza is on Substack and other social media fields. Is there anywhere that people can reach you, Raza?
Yeah, on all of the platforms, just put Raza John Vedadi and I come up.
Okay. So there, that's the plugs done. And of course, don't forget Deep Dive Perspective. We're here for you as well. Like, share, thank, and subscribe. And until the next show, goodbye.